As the kids are finishing up their way to class, I want to go ahead and introduce Joe to give him as much of his time as possible. Joe Moon is the preacher over at Pumpkin Center. He's been there since the beginning of January. He and his wife Liz have two small children. They have Titus and Enoch. And he is a graduate of the Brown Trail School of Preaching, and this is his first work over there at Pumpkin Center. And I know that they're excited to have him over there, and just hope that things go well with him over there. I got to hear him back at the Men's Day back in March and was impressed with his lesson and thought he did a great job with that, and been looking forward to having him come speak to us. And so I'm not going to take any more of his time and let him come and speak to us about Joseph. And I think it's a little bit ironic. You know, Joe's going to talk to us about Joseph, but that'll be good. Anyway, thank you. Which podium do you want? Okay.
Good evening. You would be turning over to the book of Genesis. They're about chapter 40. First, I'd like to begin by thanking Clint and the eldership here for the invitation to come and be a part of your summer series. As he sent me the link with all the different weeks that you guys were studying, I thought, man, that's a good summer series. We'll probably steal that ourselves one of these days and use that same outline because it's just a great study. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I really do appreciate it. Now, I was given the topic, what are some lessons on commitment in the life of Joseph? My immediate reaction was to look at Joseph himself and where did he commit himself? What could we learn about Joseph himself? But I opened my Bible to Genesis 37, began reading the account of Joseph's life, and I realized there's a lot in there about commitment that doesn't necessarily relate directly to Joseph himself. Maybe it's those around him. So this evening we'll outline first by looking at some character traits that accompany commitment. When you see a committed person, you often see these other character traits along with it. Then we'll look at actually those around Joseph. And there'll be 6 examples there from people around Joseph, 3 good examples and 3 bad examples for us to look at. So begin with me by thinking about character traits that accompany committed people. I'll tell a story to help illustrate this. Where I'm from in Indiana, our county's basically only claim to fame is that Larry Bird grew up there. He was born and raised there. Other than that, we got nothing. Well, that being the case, I heard a lot of Larry Bird stories growing up, and I did some more research to double check that these were true. Something that's amazing about him as a basketball player is he was not very good in high school. His freshman year, he played JV. His sophomore year, he set out with an ankle injury. But he came back after that sophomore year, and he began to be a different player entirely than he was before. He had studied the game, he had watched the game from the bench his entire sophomore year, and he began to understand it better. He wasn't just going through the motions. Now he was committed mentally and physically to the game. And I read a pretty interesting article about an interview about one of his coaches, and he talked about, you'd see Larry, on a Friday night in the middle of the rain out there playing in the parking lot, not running around with his friends, not trying to have fun or do the things that teenagers normally do. He was playing basketball. He was committed to being the best that he could be. Well, by his senior year, he had the scouts looking, and you probably know he transitioned into a college, then eventually into the professional player that we all know him for. But as we think about someone that's that devoted to something, that spends every last second that they have thinking about how to get better at it, how to do it as much as they can, how would you describe that person? How would you describe someone so committed to a particular task? Dedicated, passionate. What was that? Diligent, yes. Any other? I like the D words because I went with D words myself for this. I have 4 words that I think would sum up someone like that. Dependable. If you know someone's dedicated to a certain thing, they're going to be dependable. It's something that if there's an opportunity to get better at that, they'll be there. If there's an opportunity to serve or to practice that particular skill set, you can count on that person to be there to do that. They're going to practice. They're going to be dedicated and dependable for that particular thing. Another is determined. Sometimes we think about determination, we think about someone with an end goal in mind. They may not know exactly how everything's going to work out to get there, but they're determined to get to a particular point. And we'll see that later in the life of Joseph, that he was determined in certain aspects, and that shows in the commitment that we see. Next is durability. If you're really committed to something, you're going to be durable. Whereas determination maybe is kind of a mental state, I think of durability as a physical state. No matter what gets you down, no matter if it's sickness, health issues, maybe the loss of something around us, if we're truly committed to something, we're going to be durable. We're going to endure those things that could slow us down, and we're going to still get to our end goal. We're going to focus on that thing we're committed to. And lastly is deliberate. I'm sure you've all heard or possibly even said to someone, "Don't bother me right now, I've got something I'm trying to do." You're focused, you're determined, you're deliberate in your actions, you're taking a very specific path to get a task done. So all of those traits accompany commitment. So as we read through the account of Joseph's life in different aspects, we'll see these character traits coming out in people. We'll see their determination maybe. We might see their durability or their deliberate actions for a certain particular thing. But I also want to note in that we can notice commitment. And we notice it because of the character traits that go along with it. We can look at someone and we can say that person is a committed person. We can look and see if it's maybe a commitment to sports or to family or to religion or to work. We can look and notice that because of those other characteristics we just talked about. So we'll begin to move now into those examples around Joseph. Commitment in those around Joseph. 3 good examples, 3 bad, and I just followed through with the order of the text. So actually the first 3 examples are all negative examples. They're examples, you might say, of commitment done wrong. Things that people were committed to they shouldn't have been. The first is an overcommitment to family. Who can you think of in the account of Joseph's life that was overcommitted to family? Or at least to one particular family member? His father, Jacob. Look with me at chapter 37. We'll read verse 3 and verse 4. Chapter 37, verse 3 and verse 4. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. So we can look at that and say, we know that he messed up. We know that he shouldn't have shown favoritism. We know that he overcommitted himself to one son, and then later to the other son from the same woman, but he overcommitted himself to that son and caused problems within the brothers themselves. Ultimately, that hatred was a large part of why they decided to sell Joseph into slavery. Decided to kill him and then change their mind to slavery. But that was motivated in large part because of this. Also because he would tell them the dreams and the other things that would frustrate them. But a lot of it was Joseph's fault. As I thought about an overcommitment to family and how that might affect us as Christians, I got to thinking that's a temptation for us as it relates to God. We know that we're to be committed to God. Sometimes we're just as tempted to overcommit to family instead of God. For example, Sunday morning may roll around and we have a decision to make. Am I going to go to worship this morning, or am I going to go to our family reunion that we have once a year? Well, then we've pitted commitment to family against commitment to God. Which one will we choose? It's up to us, but don't overcommit to family. Another example is with our children. We know sometimes children need discipline. They need instruction. We know that that's something that godly parents have to do, but isn't the temptation in the world around us to say, oh, don't discipline your children. Don't correct them. Let them learn on their own. Let them be free thinkers and independent, and don't harm them by discipline. Well, then we're pitting a commitment to what we think our family needs versus a commitment to God and what He's told us to do with our family. Or another example might be those that are tempted to change biblical doctrine for their family. We see this sadly more than we would like to. We see someone who maybe their children grow up and get out on their own and decide to practice some sin that parent in the past has taken a stand against. But now that a child's involved, they change their position. They say, I think I was wrong all those years. That sin really isn't that bad. Maybe I don't even think it's sin at all. Well, then we've done exactly what Jacob did. We've overcommitted to family. We've undercommitted to God. So if we have to choose between the two, a commitment to the Lord or a commitment to family, I encourage you always commit to the Lord. Most of the time we can commit to both properly without any conflict. Next, in the Genesis account there in Joseph's life, we see a group of people that are committed to self. And we already understand the problem with that, but what group in Joseph's life was entirely committed to self? That's all that they really worried about. His brothers. Yes. If we think about what they did, even without rereading it, we remember what they did. The selfish action they took. They hated Joseph, so then they sold him into slavery. But we're going to read some of that just to reinforce just how selfish this was. Look with me at chapter 37. We'll read 18 through 20 as we begin. 37, 18 through 20. They saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what his dreams, or what become of his dreams." How selfish would one have to be to hate their sibling so much they decide to kill him? And we know from verse 28 they ended up selling him into slavery instead, but it's really not much better. In a lot of ways that may be worse as we think about slavery. We might rather be dead than a slave. But think about how selfish that was. It's that one act in itself. I'm so worried about me and the way that you've offended me. I'll do anything I can to get even. But in my opinion, it gets worse. If you would read with me 32 through 35 of the same chapter, we see it's bad enough they do this to their brother, but look at the pain that they caused their father. 32 through 35. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This we found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." And he identified it and said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Imagine the selfishness of that, the commitment to self. I'm so offended at my brother, I'm willing to watch my father suffer in this way. We've probably all known someone that lost a child. We saw the suffering they go through. Imagine causing that for someone just because it made my life easier. It's hard to fathom a selfishness like that. And because of this commitment to self, in this instance, they never can get over it. Look with me at chapter 50. Even after Joseph's revealed himself to his brothers, even after he's treated them well and he's taking good care of them, and at points between chapter 37 and chapter 50, it almost seems like his brothers are a little bit better. Like maybe they're not so selfish anymore. They're working together and they're trying to save their family. But then look with me in chapter 50. That selfishness comes right back. They can't shake what they've done to Joseph. They can't shake worrying about themselves all the time. Look with me at chapter 50, 15 through 18. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him." So they sent a message to Joseph saying, "Your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, 'Please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father.'" Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." When we read through that account, from beginning to end, we see an example of a selfish mentality, a commitment to self. They were never really committed to one another or to Joseph or to their father. It was always about, let's protect me. Let's be committed to me. And that lifestyle, that way of living is just as dangerous to a Christian today as it was to them. We saw the problems it caused them, but today how many homes have been destroyed, and these wouldn't necessarily be Christian homes, but just around us in the nation, how many homes have been destroyed because of a parent's selfishness, whether maybe it's a selfish affair that a father decides to have, or it's a mother who selfishly spends on things she wants and desires and leaves the kids in need. And that same thing would apply to the church. Just like selfishness hurts a physical family like it did Joseph's family and like it does sometimes families around us, it hurts the church. We don't think it's selfish when we decide not to be involved in something that the congregation has going on. Oh, there'll be plenty of other people that can be there, that can do what needs done. But it's very demoralizing sometimes to be part of the 10% that does 90% of the work. As we often tell that as a joke, but sadly it's true. Sadly, we get so wrapped up in the things that we have going on that we don't worry about what the congregation needs, what the community needs from the congregation. We worry about me. What can I do? What will benefit me? As we think about Philippians chapter 2, specifically verse 3 through 5, but really a greater context than that, that's the exact opposite of the mind of Christ. The mind of Christ says, esteem others more valuable than you. Lift others up, look at their needs, then look at your needs. So the second type of commitment we as Christians need to avoid entirely is a selfish commitment, a commitment to me, myself, and I. The third one is a commitment to sin. Who in the life of Joseph seems entirely committed to sin? This one may be a little bit tougher. What's that? Did I hear Potiphar's wife? Okay. Yeah. And we could debate probably a little bit about, was she committed to sin or was she committed to Joseph because of his handsomeness? But just at least play this out with me a little bit in your mind. I kind of imagined as I read it, you've got this woman who lives a very luxurious life. Her husband's well-to-do in the nation, plenty of money, but maybe he's not home much. Maybe he's not home at all. He's working constantly, so she's got all the money she wants, but she has no one to enjoy it with. So she's fixed on that idea of Joseph, maybe because it's a way to get back at Potiphar. We don't know that. I'm just speculating. But either way, we see this woman that's committed to that sin. And I'd say she had very little commitment to Joseph, because eventually when he finally pushes enough and says, I won't do that, and runs away, she turns around and makes him look as bad as she can. It's not like she just said, okay, I'll let that go because, I love Joseph and maybe one day it'll work out. No, she goes from this lust and this desire for Joseph to sheer hatred for Joseph. Let's get him killed or thrown into prison. Let's tell my husband he tried to assault me and see what my husband will do to him. Look with me at chapter 39. We'll read verse 6, verse 7, and verse 10. These verses they'll stress the emphasis that we're putting on this commitment. It was a daily thing. This is all she thought about. She was committed to this from the time she got up to the time she went to bed. It's what she thought about every single day. 39, verse 6, verse 7, and verse 10. So he left all he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And after a time his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, lie with him. Verse 10. And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. Special emphasis on that day after day. Continuing. All the time. That's all that she was thinking about. How can I get this sin to happen? How can I commit myself to acting out this sin? When I got to this example, I thought, how well does that fit with modern day America? Her mentality is the mentality we find in the world around us. We live in a nation that's committed to sin. We find ways to make it more convenient. We find ways to get the government to pay for it. We see billboards, and these are two billboards that I've seen fairly recently. One said, sex happens, but STDs don't have to. Another said, black women take care of their families by taking care of themselves. Abortion is self-care. Others maybe say things like drink responsibly, pick a designated driver. So in our country, it's become common just in everyday advertising to encourage the practice of sin, to commit ourselves to practicing some act of sin that we know we shouldn't. Other institutions, such as oftentimes, sadly, the case high schools and colleges, push our children, you accept sin in the LGBT community, or you accept these sins of others. At the same time, they try to get us to quit practicing our own faith. So we have to be diligent as Christians not to allow that attitude to creep into our lives. We have to be diligent not to commit ourselves to sin, but rather to commit ourselves to the fight against it. We see how consuming it is, one, in the example of Potiphar's wife, but also just in those around us. It's a trap. Once we get caught up in that commitment to sin, it just spirals out of control and gets worse and worse and worse until there's probably no way out, or there's a very slim chance of getting out of that entrapment in that sin. So are there any questions about the three negative examples of commitment that we've looked at? If not, we will move on to the three positive examples. The first is the example of good leadership. Who was possibly the best leader that we look at from Genesis 37 to Genesis 50? What's that? Moses? That'd be Exodus. Joseph. That would be our first guess, is who's the best example of leadership would be Joseph. But I'm actually gonna guess someone else. And this had never been something I paid attention to until I read through, but think about the Pharaoh that Joseph worked under. But before we actually get into the text where it talks about him, think of the Pharaoh that was in charge in Moses' day. Moses goes to him, he begs to let the people out. That Pharaoh won't do it. Moses begins to work these plagues. The Pharaoh still won't listen, even to the point that his magicians at one point say, basically, they say, we can't do what they're doing. That's the finger of God. And later in chapter 10 of the book of Exodus, the magicians ask Pharaoh, can you not tell that this country is ruined? Why will you not let these people go? Please let them go so that this will stop. That's how hard-hearted the Pharaoh in Moses' day was. He was only worried about one thing. He was worried about self. I don't want to look bad. I don't want to say that I'm not powerful. I don't want to say that Moses has more power than me or that the God of Moses has more power. I'm not worried about my people. I'm not worried about what they're going through. I'm worried about how I look. Now compare that with what we read in chapter 41, 37 through 41. So we'll read Genesis 41, 37 through 41. And here we'll see that the Pharaoh that Joseph worked under was a very good leader. He was committed to good leadership. Verse 37 beginning. This proposal pleased Pharaoh and all of his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as it regards the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh goes on to give him his signet ring and give him a wife and set him up in this position of basically second in command. As we think about the example Pharaoh set there as a good leader, what things stick out to you? As you read that, what kind of impresses you about his action? Yeah, he trusted Joseph, and if we think about who Joseph was, I mean, just the day before, he's a slave in prison. Now Pharaoh says, well, this man's speaking for God. I'm going to listen to him. I don't care who he is. He knows what he's talking about. That's impressive.
To your point about his leadership, good leaders put good people in good positions.
else that kind of strikes you or jumps out at you?
He's truly acting out the best interest of his people, not just for himself.
Yeah, he's acting on the best interest of his people. He's not worried about, man, I'm going to have to admit that this guy knows more about what they need than I do. And this guy's a Hebrew, and he's a slave. He doesn't do that. He says, hey, this is the man we need to listen to. This is going to save us from this famine. Let's do it. Let's listen to him. Let's do whatever he says. And that's amazing. That jumps out at us as a leader. That took humility. That took a very strong man, and that's basically what Clint was saying. It takes a strong man that's in a position of leadership to say, this guy is going to be better at this task than me. I'm going to allow him to do that, and even I'll look up to him for the answers, at least for these particular problems. That type of humility took a very strong man.
That's especially important to a Pharaoh who was looked upon as a god by
Yeah.
the people. So that's an extra humility.
I would imagine, yes. And I think that's probably the problem of the Pharaoh in Moses' day is he thought of himself as God and couldn't let that go. But this Pharaoh acknowledges that man has the Spirit of God in a way that we don't. Or even, he himself did. I think that's a very powerful lesson on leadership. Check my notes here. I think we basically hit everything that I had, especially wanted to hit that part about, as a leader, he was worried about his people far more than he was worried about himself. I think if we would study that leadership model, that sets a good example, a powerful example for our elderships in the Lord's church, or for the men that run congregations if there is no eldership, and for preachers. What if the eldership or the preacher was willing to say, I'm in over my head, I need to ask specifically the Word of God and get the answers from that. Sometimes we jump to a decision and we think we know best. We make our mind up to act, and then we kind of look at God's Word after and say, yeah, I think I made the right choice. I can use that scripture to back it up. Whereas we need to say, I don't understand this situation. Let me consult God's Word. Let me recognize I'm in over my head and I need help. It's basically what Pharaoh did. Another is, in the body, if the eldership's willing to say, we probably don't have the exact best skill for this particular task, but let's find someone in the congregation that is excellent at that task and get them to do that on our behalf. Get them to work for us and in that capacity to carry out a particular task. And an eldership with no pride issue. Essentially, we could say that about Pharaoh. He had no pride issue. He had no problem admitting when he needed the help. And luckily for us, there are congregations in the Brotherhood with elderships like that. There are congregations in the Brotherhood with strong elderships that are willing to say, we need to consult the Word of God. We need to use our congregation to build us up. We need to use people's skills. We need to all get along and recognize that the other elders are just as good and qualified and capable in that position as I myself am. But we also have elderships that aren't. We have elderships that decide to act first and then check God's Word, and that's when we have the problem of letting in things that are unscriptural, things that go against God. We've got 2 more and not very many minutes.
When it all works out right, whatever the objective is, it won't matter which one did it, because God will get the glory.
Yeah, that is a very good point. That in the end, the glory goes to God and not the one particular individual who did the task. And that's a very good point. The second positive example that we see is a commitment to one's morals. And for the sake of time, I'll just tell you to turn there. Chapter 43 and verse 32. I was amazed reading through this, the commitment the Egyptians had to their moral system. And we don't know a whole lot about what they believed and how they believed specifically. But for whatever reason, they thought it was an abomination to eat with the Hebrews. And I'm not condoning their pagan beliefs, but I am impressed that here Joseph is second in command in the kingdom. An extremely powerful man. Maybe even, a bit of a celebrity or fairly famous. But when it came time to eat, they said, no, we can't have anything to do with you right now. We'll eat over here, you eat over there. And his brothers ate in a different place. That was powerful to me. Look with me there, 43 verse 32. They served him by himself, referring to Joseph, and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. That's powerful. They had such a commitment to their moral standard that even for the second in command, even for the man that saved them from the famine, they wouldn't break that moral compass. We as the Lord's church could learn a lot from that today. What's that? Yeah, they were immoral in their beliefs, but their commitment to their beliefs is very impressive. Their resolve to do what they thought was right. Yeah, and I definitely agree. They believe pagan things, but their resolve to keep their morals is what we should focus on. Because there's the example for us. Sometimes we let the pressure around us get us to twist our morals or change our morals, and there's getting to be more and more of that pressure all the time. But we see a commitment to one's morals is very noble. And lastly is a commitment to one's promises. And we don't have time necessarily to look at this, but in Genesis 15, God makes a promise to Abraham, your descendants will go to a foreign country, they'll be there, they'll endure punishment, and they'll be pulled back out. Well, that's in Genesis 15. Now it comes to Jacob, and in chapter 46, as he's on his way to go to Joseph, to meet Joseph in Egypt, God appears to him in a dream and says, I'll protect you, I'll keep you safe. You're going to have Joseph be there to close your eyes when you die. So we see a commitment to one's promises from God. God shows us the perfect example of that in the life of Joseph, because he's keeping a promise that he had made to their forefathers. And very quickly, I'll mention, we didn't have time to get to this, but Joseph's commitments themselves. We could break that down into 4 categories. First and foremost, he was committed to God. And that's the reason we see his commitment to other things. Up here at the top is, I'm committed to God, and that's going to affect how I view all these other things. That affected his commitment to his earthly leader. If you study it through on your own, you'll notice no matter where Joseph is, he's committed to the one that's his master. Whether it's in prison, and he's working for the man that is in charge of the prison, whether it's Potiphar, whether it's his father who says, go to your brothers out in the field, or whether it's Pharaoh himself, he's committed to that man that he's under. He was committed to marriage. Long before he was ever married, he was committed to marriage. When Potiphar's wife said, have an affair with me, he was committed to the sanctity of marriage. It's a powerful lesson for our young people today, is be committed to marriage long before you're ever ready for marriage. And lastly, he was committed to family. He was committed to his own family in spite of what they had done to him. Because he was committed to marriage, he was committed to other people's family. And later through the text, we see he was committed to his own immediate family, his wife, and his children. And then very quickly as well, 4 things that his commitment led to. They led to success. The old saying we have that you can't keep a good man down. Joseph proves that. He was successful anywhere he was put because he was committed to the right things. He was committed to God and service to God, and that made him excel in whatever he did. Because of his commitment, he was trustworthy. Joseph was the kind of guy people knew, I can trust that guy. He's going to tell the truth. He's going to do the right thing. He's committed to God. He has morals. He'll do what he says he will do. He was changed into having the proper perspective. In chapter 50 and verse 20, when his brothers are afraid, we just read a few of the verses right before that. His brothers are afraid he's going to punish them now that their father's dead. And he says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. That's a big one for us as a Christian. Learn that our commitment to God influences our perspective. We should have a proper perspective, and that will help us understand suffering and pain and the things that those in the world don't understand and can't understand. We can understand that in the end, it all works out. In the end, there's going to be a benefit that we can look back and see. And lastly, our commitment may lead us to being hated. It led Joseph to being hated. There were different people throughout that book that, because of his commitment, they absolutely hated him. The same may be true for us as a Christian. We are out of time. Thank you for your attention.